Hello, welcome. We'll get started here in just a minute. I'll wait for a few more folks to come in, see those numbers climbing there. All right. Climbing faster. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike DeHilster, Client Success Consultant here at Founded, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar and thank you for joining us today. We appreciate the time you've carved out from your day to be here with us at this fundamental training webinar on manual entry for GLM and SLM. We will be recording the webinar, so if you missed something or would like to review anything, it will be posted to YouTube, and you will also get an email with a link to the recording within 24 hours. A post-webinar survey will pop up automatically as you exit the webinar today. This fundamental webinar series was developed based on your feedback. We review each survey, and we greatly appreciate it if you would share your thoughts, ideas, or concerns in the survey after today's webinar has concluded. It really does help. All right. For the webinar today, we are using Zoom. We are providing live closed captioning on today's webinar. These are automatic captions and may not capture our presenters' words with 100% accuracy. You may hide or edit your settings by clicking the closed caption icon. We will not be using the raise your hand or chat features today, so please type your questions in the Q&A box, and we will either type responses or answer them live. Any questions entered in the Q&A box today will be posted along with the answers on the Compass post for today's webinar, which we'll post later.
Mike, sorry to interrupt. Do you want to share the deck?
Holy cow, I sure do. I sure
You haven't
do.
missed anything, folks, but we do have an image that helps show you some of the Zoom buttons that Mike's talking about. There we go.
I got all excited about what I was doing there. So we're going to be using Q&A, and you can click on the closed caption button to change that. Thanks, Elsie. All right. So the next slide here. Zoom also provides several viewing options during the webinar. Interacting with the two vertical lines between the presentation and the presenters will allow you to size up or down the presenter images. You can also navigate to view options or explore other view settings. These types of webinars are just one way that the client success team here at Founded is working to ensure that all clients continue to be successful as we lean into our mission of maximizing the impact of the philanthropic community. To learn more about how you can connect with our client success team, just click the blue question mark icon at the bottom of any of your Founded sites and select the Success Team tab. Today, you'll be receiving training from Elsie and I. We're very excited to talk to you today, and hopefully you'll have some great ideas for how manual entry can fit into your workflows. So now I'm going to hand it over to Elsie to go over the learning objectives for today's session and review some key terms. Elsie.
Thanks. So here's our objectives for today. Number one being that everyone walks away, hopefully at least a little closer to being a master in manual entry. And if you're already like, I have no idea what manual entry is, no worries. This is a fundamentals webinar, so we're going to start at the very beginning. But in short, manual entry is something that allows you to enter requests on behalf of or in replace of applicants coming into your site and submitting an application or submitting an LOI. So it's a pretty powerful tool. It's something you can do as an administrator. Some folks who aren't aware of this functionality might be doing this already by proxying in as an applicant and submitting things on their behalf, but this is something you can do without having to proxy in, you can do as an admin. So we're going to get into that and go over the basics of how you do manual entry. And then we're also going to go over some use cases. So we're hoping everyone walks away today with some ideas of how you might use this in GLM and SLM. We're going to start in SLM today, but GLM folks, please continue to hang out with us because this functionality works almost identically in the two in the two sites. There's some subtle differences and then also differences in how you might use them, but GLM folks, you'll definitely get stuff out of hanging out with us here while we're in the SLM site. Mike's going to do a pretty basic use case that is quite transferable over to GLM. And then last but not least, if you start using manual entry, something that's really important to understand is when your applicants or grantees will see the information that you enter as a manual entry. There's lots of options to hide or show this to applicants, and some default settings, some things you can override. It's good to understand your options and to understand what happens as at default if you're starting to get into manual entry. Okay, next slide, Mike. So some key terms I already kind of went over: manual entry, so entering requests on behalf of applicants. Another term you're going to hear us say is applicant visibility, and that's getting at what I was just talking about, is when can an applicant see this request that was manually entered? And there's some default applicant visibility settings, and then there's also a feature in which you can override the default setting. So all we're talking about here is when will the applicant see the request that you have manually entered on their behalf. And then last terms is public, restricted, and internal processes. So these are process types that when you set up a process, you can pick which one of these you want to use. And this is another thing to keep in mind when using manual entry, because they're going to work a little different. We're going to demo today one of each. Well, we're going to demo an internal and a restricted. The restricted works very similar to public, though. But just to go over these real quick, a public process would be one that is on your apply page. When an applicant shows up, everyone sees that. Restricted one would be one where maybe there's an access code in front of it. So not all applicants will see it on the apply code, but they might need to put in, well, they do need to put in a code in order to see it. And then an internal process, you'd really only have an internal process to do manual entry into. An internal process will never show up on an applicant's apply page. So you would make these specifically for doing manual entry into them. And then some other resources just to keep in mind: there is a course on manual entry in your sandbox site. So if you go into those Found It courses under managing your site, there's a little walkthrough of manual entry there. And then we have some support articles that if you're going to start using this first time, you could bookmark. Really easy to find: manual request entry, and then one on applicant visibility override, which is really helpful to bookmark. Even I have to remind myself how that works in the default settings. Cool. Hand it back to you, Mike.
All right, awesome. So we're going to just keep on going off of what Elsie just talked about. So this is something that we want you to keep in mind as we go through this. So if you don't quite to get it immediately, don't worry, we're going to be reinforcing this as we go. So what we want to talk about here is applicant visibility defaults for manual entry. So for our public or restricted processes, when is an applicant going to see it? They will see the request on their dashboard once the application or LOI is marked complete by the admin. So marked complete. And I'll note here that there's actually not a submitted. It skips over submitted and goes from draft to complete when you're doing manual entry as an admin. For an internal process, the applicant will see the request once it's been approved or denied by the admin. That is the default. So we can actually change these defaults, and you can have a lot of nice options depending on what you want to accomplish by enabling this setting: enable applicant visibility override. So I am going to, whoops, we're not quite there yet, but I'm going to come back to that slide. I wanted to jump in a site. This is my sandbox site, my SLM scholarship sandbox site. And I want to show you right off where that setting is. So the setting's called enable applicant visibility override, and it's behind your toggle. And I always remember it's just past our custom role names, so you can kind of see it. And here it is. Enable applicant visibility override set to true. I've already got it on my site, so I have these options. This really just gives you the ability and the flexibility to hide or show different requests, and not only set that at particularly for internal, set that at a process level, but then also override it on a per request basis. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. Okay. Now, I want to show you kind of what this looks like. So I'm going to jump into a process and show you how that's set up. I go into my process manager. Again, I'm in a scholarship site. So I've got some universes in here, but I'm going to go into processes. And since I mentioned universes, I will note that you cannot do manual entry into a universe. So keep that in mind. But in our process manager for standalone processes, I have this one set up that I'm going to be demoing with an outside scholarship scenario. So what I'm going to do here is jump into the process to edit it. And I'm going to go into this edit process summary. Right over here, when we're setting up at the process level, we've got our visibilities of that public, restricted, internal that Elsie mentioned. If you're unsure or forget, we've got these great tooltips. Don't forget about the question marks. They are loaded with great information. So you can see what that visibility at the process level looks like. And then we have some applicant visibility options for internal. So to go over these, I will float over this because we have three options. We have blank, which is an actual option. It's the default show and hide. So what these mean, again, is for blank, the default is requests in the process will be visible to the applicants once they're approved or denied. If I choose show, requests in this process will be visible to applicants as soon as they are created. They will see your work in progress. Depending on if they're already in the system or, there's a lot of different scenarios to perhaps think about, to understand what the applicant might see. And then hide hides the request and it hides it from their request history. So organization, student applicants would not even see it in their history. Thing to keep in mind there is if you want to take advantage of follow-ups, you don't want to hide it because, again, they won't be able to see it. So just a little note there. Okay. Any questions that you see, Elsie, so far?
We do not have any questions yet, but yeah, just a reminder, folks, we're not using the chat. So if you have questions, go ahead and put it in the Q&A.
Put those in the Q&A, absolutely. Okay. Well, if there's no questions so far, I'm actually going to go back to my slide here really quick and talk about some scenarios for what would you use manual entry for SLM, for scholarships. The first one is outside scholarships. So this is a term that we kind of use for those scholarships where you don't run the application process, but it is beneficial in some way to have this in SLM to show the students. Maybe they have other awards in there and it's helpful, or if you're a community foundation, maybe you hold the funds for a scholarship but don't run their application process. The second one is very similar. So additional awards for students that applied for other awards. So you as an admin see that a scholarship student has something that would be, has a profile, if you will, that would be good for another scholarship opportunity. You could manually enter into another process and get that in front of evaluators for a different award. And then nominations. Perhaps you have a very short application that you're going to manually enter, several students to put in front of evaluators for them to choose. So they're just being nominated, the student's not doing the applying, but you can still handle that in SLM. So those are just some ideas. Hopefully that gets the ball rolling, and then whoops, I keep clicking the button and spoilering for GLM there, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so now I'm going to actually finally demo the process of how you do the manual entry. But one last thing, I've got my process in here. I'm going into my process manager again. just some quick setup notes in the actual process. For manual entry, I have a very short application that you'll see, but I wanted to point out that I have all of my auto emails for the application off. I don't want that applicant accidentally getting anything. My decision forms, my approval forms, my installment forms are the same as they would be in a normal scholarship site. And my follow-ups, which is one of the reasons that I want to do this outside scholarship scenario, because I want this acceptance form from the student, and I want to be able to give them their year two, for their second payment. So this is what I want to take advantage of, and I've got my full spread of emails. I need to actually do this one as well, but I've got my emails that it's going to say, hey, you've been approved. You might handle that a different way, but that's how I have it set up. And I've got my due date reminders. Very important to help you automate that process, of course. Okay. Manual entry. Let's get someone in that Gary Johnson process. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go search for a user. We do this not by proxying, but we do start from a user record. So I'm going to find an applicant here. Search. All right, let's try Amari Blackburn here. So rather than proxying, I'm just going to go into their user record by clicking on the last name. Once I do that and it loads, I'm going to click on request history, and I have this button here, create request. This enables me to start this process. One thing that I did forget to show you is the process that you're going into manual entry, even if it's internal, which this one is, needs to be toggled on the process manager. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and choose my Gary Johnson Memorial and click continue. In this area, for GLM, I think Elsie may show you, you'll also have an organization record and a user that you'll be able to configure. But for SLM, it's just going to be this process, and it's going to go to the user that I've chosen. So now I'm going to do a quick application for on Amari's behalf. So I'm going to put in this Blackburn, county of residence, Franklin, put in, I know his GPA. This is all information that I've been given in theory from a committee. High school, Franklin High, intended major, reading intervention specialist, and that's my very short manual entry application. As an admin, I don't really want to to have too much to do here, but I want enough information to go on, especially if I'm going to put this in front of an evaluator. But in this case, these have been approved by a committee already, so I am going to just I can go straight to approve. But my options here are I can save and come back, and I can mark it complete. Again, we don't have the submitted option here for admins, so I'm just going to go ahead and approve this. All right, and I've got my project name, my decision date, and award date. I'm just going to leave those as the default of today. I'm going to do an installment because I'm going to do 2 years, 4,000, and I can just approve as usual. Okay, I've got my installments pre-configured. It's going to add 12 months between. Just need to click add those installments. I can see my dates are correct, and that's what I want. So I just improve those. And now I've got my follow-ups that I showed earlier with my dates. And I'm going to tie these to their appropriate installment forms and just go ahead and assign that. At that moment, any auto emails that I have associated with that are going to go right out. And so it's a normal process. And then at that point of approval, based on the default that I set in my process. Again, I'm going to go back to the process manager for Gary Johnson. Internal, my visibility was blank, but again, that means something. That means when I approved it, it became visible on their dashboard. You may need to have instructions for them to go in and access that information if they're not already in the system, but that can be part of the emails that you set up. All right, and then the last thing that I'm going to show is on my dashboard, how to change the visibility if you need to at the request level. I'm going to go into approved because you're only going to have this option if follow-ups have not been assigned. If you have follow-ups assigned, you'll have to delete them in order to change the visibility. So if I just go into, this is a public one, Easy Process Scholarship. If I go into this one, and then in the request summary, down to advanced options, right here, in addition to the revert status that's usually here, we now have, since I turned on that setting, applicant visibility. This is our override. So it's public, but I can choose to hide this completely from the applicant. Since this one's already approved, show doesn't really do much different from here, but for public process. And then, so what does it look like for internal? So for internal, on the process level, remember, I had it as blank, but if I had done show, I can override this. So let me scroll down. Here's my Gary Johnson. It's a different student, but that's okay. Scroll down to advanced options. So I've got the default visibility of internal, or I can choose to show or hide. Again, if I want to do follow-ups, I don't want to do hide, but show, that'll just be able to, they'll be able to essentially see your work in progress as you're working through your application on their behalf. Okay. Any questions in there, Elsie?
Yeah, we have a couple. I typed a few answers, so folks, if I didn't give you a good enough answer, feel free to chime in again, but we do have a couple still. So Lorenzo is wondering, I noticed when you create a request, it also said something about cannot contain a qualification. Does this mean if they do not meet the eligibility requirements based on their general application, they won't be able to be added to the process?
Yeah, so do you want to talk about qualification and what that is, Elsie?
Well, so I think I'm interpreting this right, like the qualification stage. Is that what you're thinking, Mike?
Yeah,
so,
that's what that refers to, for sure.
Okay, so there is a little known stage that lives before an LOI even, called qualification, that is an old stage, is not commonly used anymore. And so you cannot, if you happen to be one of those people using that stage, you cannot manually enter into a process that starts with that stage. If you're now say you have a process that has an eligibility quiz, I'm pretty sure that works just fine. It acts as a restricted process and you can manually enter into a process that has eligibility quiz. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so Lorenzo, you won't run into that qualification. It's capital Q. It's an actual kind of it's an older feature. It's still, like she said, it's still in use, but it was kind of replaced by eligibility quiz for processes. So it's just there for completeness sake. Other questions, Elsie?
Okay, so then we have another question. Just to confirm, if we want to do manual entry on a UA, we would need to proxy as that student.
Yes, you would. And, depending on your application, I mean, that's as complex as that application. So there may be good reasons to go ahead and do that, but you can't do that as an admin. You do have to proxy.
Cool. Okay, that's all we got.
All right. All right, I'll stop sharing and let Elsie jump in.
Okay, can everyone see? Now I'm in a GLM site in my sandbox. So then we're
yes,
going to
can see it. Sorry.
perfect. Thank you. So then I'm going to go ahead and demo what this looks like in GLM. So it looks very similar, but we're going to do a different use case that's a little more complicated. I think there's not like a crazy number of ways folks use this in SLM, but I would say there is a large, varied amount of ways people use this in GLM, and you can get pretty creative. And new this year, you can do manual entry into a process that starts with an LOI. So that's really opened up the ways that you might use this. And so that's what I'm going to go ahead and demo. When doing manual entry into an LOI, well, and really anytime in using the site, I really encourage you all to like let go of that title, LOI, letter of interest or letter of intent, and just think of it as the first stage in your process and how is that most useful to use that stage. So in what I'm going to demo right now, this foundation is going to use the LOI stage as a place to record notes from an initial meeting with a potential partner or applicant. And they're going to use that LOI as some, internal vetting to then decide whether or not it's a good fit to invite the applicant to then apply. So in my example, rather than the applicant interacting once they've been approved, they're actually going to interact once they've been invited to fill out the application stage. So same thing, we're going to start with making sure we have a process set up. So in this case, I'm going to be using this 2023 community grant process. And you can see I have an LOI stage set up. So let's actually go in and click into that. So this LOI stage, as I mentioned, it's going to be used internally. That's what I'm going to be doing the manual entry into. So it's our partnership planning or partnership meeting notes. I have my emails turned off. And then the application stage is actually going to be used as an application. And this is where my applicant will begin interacting with the process. And so I do have some auto email set up so that when I assign the applicant's going to get an email saying, hey, we can even look at it. It was great meeting with you and we want to invite you to apply. Okay. And then same as what Mike demoed, this applicant can continue interacting with this process throughout the decision and follow-up stages as well. In my process summary, I actually am going to use a restricted process, right? So restricted meaning that it's not going to show up on my general apply page. I could direct an applicant to start a request in this process if I gave them this code. I have no intention to ever do that because this first form, as I mentioned before, has been built out as an internal facing form. But the reason I'm using restricted versus internal is those visibility defaults that Mike went over earlier. I want my applicants to see this request once that first stage is marked complete. If I made it internal, they wouldn't be able to see it until I approved or denied them, in which case it would be hard for them to fill out an application. So I'm using this restricted process for that reason, because I like the visibility settings of what it allows me to do. Okay. So that's all set up. So in order to go ahead and enter a manual entry or a manual request, I'm going to start, rather than looking up a user, since we're in a GLM site, I'm going to look up the organization. So search organizations. If this organization has never interacted with GLM before or is new, I can manually add them, or I can also import them from GuideStar. If you are Candid, formerly GuideStar, I still have that language in my mouth. How that works is you look up their by name or tax ID, and you can pull in all their registration information. But we're going to go ahead and use one of my existing folks. So let's go ahead. We'll do this Art Space Projects, Inc. So I'm going to click into their organization summary. Now, if I had just added this organization into my site, I might consider adding some contacts, because if I just added them, they're going to be blank. They're going to have no users. This step is actually not required in a GLM site. I can do manually entered requests into an organization without any users. That's only super helpful if you never need that organization to interact or see those requests. So if you're only doing internal processes and it's only for your internal record keeping, then that can be helpful. But if you ever want this organization to be able to see these requests or interact with them, it's important to add at least one contact. And to do that, you would click add contact here. Same as with the organization, you can manually register them. Let's actually click into that because there's a couple important things. You'll want to make sure to give them the applicant role, and then you'll also want to make sure to set up a password for them. That way the system fully makes them an account. And when we'll go over this in a little bit, but when we invite them to apply, I'm going to give them directions about how to access their account that I've made on their behalf. So we'll circle back to this. Okay, so back out to my organization summary. So I have my contacts set up. Now I'm going to go same as in SLM. I'm going to go to request history and I'm going to say create request. Okay, so here I'm going to pick the process for which I want to enter the request. So that 2023 community grant. And then here's what I'm talking about in terms of I can leave it just unassigned, attached to the organization generally, or I can assign it to a specific user at that organization, which that's what I'm going to do because I want Angela, this user, to be able to come and actually apply. And so by selecting this, Angela is going to be the one who ultimately owns the request and gets the emails down the line.
Elsie, I got a question related to exactly this really quick. So Brianna asks, do applications created manually need to be assigned to the contact for them to be able to see the application created on their behalf? So that's that organization versus user. Like if it's not assigned to, like, who sees it?
Yeah, the easiest is if it needs to be assigned for them to most easily see it and for it to apply to show up on their dashboard. I believe if you leave it generally attached to the organization at large, if you have the setting turned on to show users their org history, so basically all requests associated with their organization, they would see it that way as well. But certainly the easiest thing to make sure that they see it is to assign it to a user.
Right, right. And it you know, the system is sort of designed to point these requests at a user. So in general, you'll probably want to do that. All right, thanks, Elsie.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say continue. Okay, so then I get dumped on the LOI form, which I'm going to go ahead and fill out. So maybe we're meeting about capacity support. I'm going to put in, and this is a form I built, right? So you could add whatever you want, whatever's helpful here. So Elsie is meeting with Angela. You know, I'm going to put the meeting date, any notes, you know, great fit. I could add whatever I want. Okay, so then at the end, I have the option to save this, right, which would put it to draft. Angela would not see this at that point. I could come back and keep working at it at any point. So maybe I took frantic notes in my meeting with Angela, and I want to come back and, you know, refine them before actually marking it complete. That's absolutely an option. And then I have this LOI complete button. So when I click this, this is when Angela will be able to see it on their dashboard. They will not get an email though at this point, right? So they'd only see it kind of if they happen to be looking in their site. I also have the option to approve this request. So say I have just like such a great meeting, it's such a great fit, and we agree maybe we're going to start with a small grant, and I don't need them to apply and give me more information at this point. I could skip the application and go ahead and approve it right away here. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and mark it complete because I want to invite Angela to apply. So I've marked the LOI complete. I could also mark the LOI complete and do a whole series of these with different organizations and then send that chunk to evaluators, right? So that's also an option. The manually entered requests, other than the fact that they've skipped that submitted bucket, they can move through all the same stages that a typical request could. So keep that in mind. That's also an option. In this case, we're not going to do evaluations. I feel good. I want to go ahead and assign the next form being the application. So this is the point in which Angela will actually receive an email, since I had that auto email for when the application is signed set up. So I'm going to go ahead and assign. Okay, so if we go to the email request history, we'll see that Angela just moments ago got an email saying, thanks for meeting with us. We invite you to apply. And then as I mentioned earlier, you know, if I had manually created an account for Angela, it's going to be really important to give Angela directions of how to get into the site. So in my email, I have directions of, if you've never been in our site before, we've created an account on your behalf. This is really important because if they go register themselves, they're going to make a duplicate account, and they're also going to end up somewhere where there isn't an application waiting for them to do. So, we've created an account on your behalf. Please use your email and forgot my password to set up your own password and log in for the first time. Okay. So then another thing to keep in mind with this is, let's go in and as Angela and see what this looks like. Okay, so when Angela, gets my email and logs in, they're going to see on their dashboard. So they've actually been in before. There's some old requests, but here's this request I've created on their behalf. Here's that edit application where they can go in and now do their part. But notice they also have this button to view the LOI. This we can't take away, right? So they're going to be able to click in and view that LOI. And so here's all my notes from that meeting. In this case, I've intentionally left these open and they're applicant facing. So Angela could come in and see, my notes on what we talked about. I could also decide I don't want Angela to see these notes, in which case on this form in my process manager, I would make these questions internal facing so that they're hidden, so that when Angela goes to their dashboard and clicks view LOI and opens this, they don't actually see what I don't want them to see. Now, if you hide everything on the LOI, it can be a little confusing for applicants. So I would recommend having like an instruction field or something that just says, this is an internal stage where we collected notes on our meeting, or whatever you want to say, something to basically say there should be nothing on this form, and please go back to your application. Let's see, do we have any? That's kind of high level. I'm going to talk a little bit more about use cases, but that's kind of high level how this works in GLM. Mike, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple. And so, yeah, Michelle was asking something along the lines of what you just explained. Can you make the LOI not visible to the applicant, but still move to the application stage? I think what she means is, I think you and I were talking about this, and that is you cannot, the visibility is not form level. So you can't have the LOI just not be there for the applicant while they see the application. So the solution there is, of course, administrator or internal facing fields, but
Yep.
a nice explanation
Yep.
is helpful. Another question. Katie asks, to confirm, you can do an evaluation between LOI complete and when the application would be visible to the applicant.
Yes, sorry, I had to process that. So once you click LOI complete, the applicant will see that LOI, or at least however much of it you want to share with them. But you could, before you actually assign the application, you could send those all to an evaluation stage before you actually invite the applicant to apply. So, in which case then you could approve or deny some. So something to just keep in mind, since the applicant will be able to see that LOI, that they'll know that they're in consideration or whatnot. So something to play with too. You could intentionally hide those as well until maybe whether you're going to invite them with the override. So yeah, lots of things to think through about who sees what, when, and how.
Awesome. Last question we have right now. June asks, are the questions, meeting attendees, meeting date, something that would need to be created in a process? She notes they're GLM users. So yes, so that LOI form is up to you to define. You certainly can build that to your needs with the full suite of our different question types, etc. Whatever you need in that space. And so Elsie was kind of demoing an internal LOI form, but this could be a regular LOI form in a public facing application that you're filling in on their behalf. This form, our custom form builder in GLM and SLM, it can be whatever you need it to be. And if you have questions about how you want to approach something, you can always reach out to success@foundit.com and get in touch with myself, Elsie, or one of our awesome team members to help you think through what you want to do.
Cool. Yeah, and I just jumped into my process manager to show you that, yeah, this is working just as if I was going to use this as a public facing. So it's something I can build out. Cool. Okay, I'm going to keep the questions rolling in. I'm going to jump back to our slides though and go over some more use cases. Our faces are in the way. Where is present from where I'm at? Sorry, might have to scroll through these. Okay, we're gonna get back. So other use cases, I'll get to my slide in a second, for GLM is, I would say the most common and straightforward one would be for discretionary awards or any kind of non-competitive awards. So where there is no application for applicants to apply, but you want to get in that information that, hey, we did give, X organization X dollars. If your board has dollars that they can award at their discretion, creating more similar to what Mike demoed, a specific internal process that's short and sweet and specific for getting those awards in can be really helpful using manual entry. Accessibility is another great use for manual entry. So thinking about if you have applicants who don't have the ability to come in and apply in the system for whatever reason, they don't have access to internet, they need to apply in the paper, they don't have the technical abilities, or maybe you accept oral applications, like, you go over the questions on a phone call. You could manually enter into a public facing process that other folks are applying to in the site, but you're providing some extra accessibility accommodations to someone and would enter it on their behalf. Another common use would be due diligence. So a little bit more like what I demoed is using the LOI as an internal stage to do any vetting or due diligence, or, I've seen folks set that up as like an organization profile page, that you're going to collect some information and do some internal stuff before you go ahead and invite folks to apply. And then last but not least, similar to the due diligence example, is I've seen folks use this to just help reduce burden on applicants. So something you could do is there publicly available information, right, that you could get in on your application and put in on their behalf so that the applicant doesn't have to fill out those sections. There are some limitations to how manual entry works. So I could not do manual entry into an application stage, save it in draft, and then pass it off to an applicant for them to then complete the application. The system does not let you do that. If you do some override settings and make it so the applicant can see that, they can log in and view the application, but they unfortunately can't edit it or submit it. So for this last one, like if you're going to fill out an application on an applicant's behalf, but want them to be able to view and edit it and make the final submission, it's a little bit of a trickier setup. You would build that full application in your LOI, manually enter into your LOI, and then have all your LOI questions shared forward to an application stage. Make those questions optional so that when your applicant comes in, they'd see whatever you filled out for them and have the ability to edit and then submit. That was a lot of information that I just explained orally and didn't demo. So if I lost anyone and you're interested in this, we actually have a webinar that Roots and Wings, one of our clients, did back in December with us. And they do a workflow similar to that. And so I'll drop in the chat a link to that webinar. Highly recommend checking it out. Roots and Wings is a big proponent of trust-based philanthropy. And so Jamie Carroll is who joined us, and she talks about kind of how this looks at Roots and Wings. So that's a great resource. And then also please reach out to the Success team. We're happy to talk through your specific ideas and examples and how we might make this work. So I guess just some summaries here. Key takeaways is that manual entry is super powerful to help you, enter things on behalf of a applicant. Requests that are entered using manual entry can move through all the same stages as a traditionally entered request, but it allows for a ton more flexibility in terms of how information gets into the system and by who and when, right? We can play with things. But with that, you want to be really careful about visibility settings. And then you also just want to be careful about some of the limitations mainly being that you can only manually enter into the first form, which maybe I haven't said this yet. In my example just now, I was able to manually enter into the LOI. I could not continue that, right? I couldn't then mark that complete and manually enter into the application. I don't have that ability. I would have to proxy in as the applicant to do that. And then another limitation to keep in mind is that you have to complete that first form. You have to complete it. You can't invite the applicant to work on that first form with you if you start with manual entry. Okay, that's all I got. Mike, do you have any other questions?
We do, and it's actually kind of an interesting one. Brianna asks, is there any manual entry concept for follow-ups? We want to assign follow-ups that have some information already filled in to alleviate burden. I mean, I love this question.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what our solutions are going to necessarily be. What do you think?
Yeah, so you can't manually enter into a follow-up as we've shown here. I think what you can do is play with how you use shared questions to more or less achieve the same thing. So, and whether that looks like you have a bunch of questions on your approval form that you're sharing forward to that follow-up that your applicant's eventually going to interact with and complete, that could work that way. You could also, if you have an advanced license, create an internal follow-up that has those questions that you want to fill out for them on their behalf that are then sharing to that public-facing follow-up. So no, you can't do manual entry, but I think you could achieve the same thing with using shared questions.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Aaron asks, is there a way to make a prepayment installment in Foundit before a grantee fills out an application within the same process? So creating an installment form before an approval is done, unfortunately, no. So you can't kind of, you can't sort of have that ready pre-approval, and certainly not pre-application.
Yeah, you'd have to have a request that has an approval to have an installment. So short of making two different requests, you can't do that.
And Sydney, hey Sydney, hope you're doing good. Can we have shared description boxes, in quotes, shared description boxes? I need some more information there, Sydney. Are you talking about, like, for an LOI, if you had a description question, you can share that onto the applicant, manual entry into the LOI, share it onto the application. Okay, descriptions for forms that can be shared between forms. Forms that can be shared between forms. Oh gosh, Sydney, you're thinking about something pretty complex here, and I'm not getting it, I will admit.
Yeah, maybe Sydney reach out to the success team, and it might be easier for you to show us and have a two-way conversation. Yeah.
Love to get together with you on that. Okay, Carol, I'm not sure what you were referring to, and answer this by email if you can't get back to it on the call.
Oh, Carol, I answered your question via text at the very beginning, if that's what oh, maybe you asked another question. That's probably what.
Oh, she did. Yep, I found it, Carol. She said she was not talking about manual entry. I'm talking about the 130 submitted, evaluated, approved through the UA. Okay. Like to approve requests and move them through the system without the student knowing until after their awards. Could I go into the UA and make it internal? Carol, yeah, I think we're going to have to reach out to success at foundit.com, shoot us an email, and we'll talk about how to handle that with UA. Happy to do that, of course. But I think we need to do a little bit more digging than we can on the call here. Let's see. All right. I think we are clear. We still have some time if there's any last minute questions, but Elsie's got the slide up, so I'll point out that we do have a wonderful and vibrant online community, Compass. And we're going to be able to keep that conversation going about this. And Elsie, can you drop the roots and wings?
Yep, just doing that now. I
Just
realized
doing it
I
now. Awesome.
promised it.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
So we also, so there's the roots and wings. We dropped already in the chat the Compass post that I had ready to go. So you can ask questions of each other there. Please do that. And then, yes, we've got that roots and wings. I think we can go ahead. Elsie, if you just want to reply to the Compass post and put that webinar there as well, we can take care of all of that. Okay, and excellent. So we do have to the top of the hour, and I'm happy to stay and ask questions.
Looks like we have a couple more questions just came in. I may have missed it, but when is manual entry live? I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this question correctly, but I mean, manual entry is available for all licenses and is just always on and available to use in your site. And then if you mean more about when is manual entry, I mean, we've talked a little bit about applicant visibility, like when applicants see things. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And then I guess the only other way I can interpret this question is you can only do manual entry into a process that is turned on. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So if you're doing manual entry into an internal process, you do need to toggle it on still, even though it's not actually going to show up on the apply page. So Joni, please chat back in if I didn't quite answer that. Oh,
she says, because we were demoing in like moving from Sandbox to live. Yeah, I mean, as long as it's, like Elsie was saying, as long as it's in the live site toggled on, you can use manual entry on it.
Yeah, and you need to do if you want the request to ultimately show up in live, you need to do manual entry in live. So if you do manual entry in Sandbox, it's not going to end up in your live site.
Awesome. And then a question from Jane here. Is there a way to make a manual entry for more than one user or organization at a time?
Yeah, like batch manual entry.
Batch manual entry. The short answer is no. And the reason is the information that you'd be putting in to each form is going to be different. So yeah, there's no batch option for that. All right. Any more questions? If not, we can give you a few minutes back in your day.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. And like Mike and I have said throughout, like if this piqued your interest or you have some ideas and you want to talk through them with someone, please just email success@foundit.com and we're happy to brainstorm and go through workflows with you.
All right, getting some thanks in here from folks. Yeah, thank you all. Hi, Ali. I used to work with Ali back at the Pasadena Community Foundation. So good to see you here, Ali. Thanks, everybody. Please head over for Compass. And remember, you're going to get a survey. We really appreciate your feedback on this. All right. Everybody, take care.
Bye.